Are there a few people that weren't here last week? Okay. So he's gonna pull up page 1, and basically, I'll just go through this real quickly. For various reasons, I started listening to audiobooks in the spring of 2017, and they were, biographies and histories and so forth. And I came upon this book, which was recommended, and I wasn't going to read it because I never cared for Paul. And but it said it was like on the New York Times bestseller, so why not? So I did it. And then I told, if you were here last Wednesday, you heard that I listened to it 3 times, then I read the hardback once. But it raises a lot of questions. And so to answer those questions, I did a lot of research. And I guess what we're going to see today is the results. And I'm going to summarize what we did last week of the research I did. But this is not going to be a class where I'm going to explain, 1 Corinthians and second, every little thing. Because is Steve still here?
No.
Oh, good. I can make fun of Steve.
Make fun of Steve.
As we've learned from Steve, he can turn it into a long, long thing, and we don't have the time to do that.
We do not have the time.
We don't have time. So this is really about the history behind Paul. And I tell you, I bugged Steve to I got to do this, so I'll stop doing this. And even since I saw you last week, it was just more stuff. So anyway, if you go to to the second page and third page, what I pointed out to everybody last week was Paul was a persecutor. He was an apostle. It was like there's a lot of contradictions in him. And when you look at the New Testament, it's in its entirety. One of the handouts I gave you today, that's an outline of the book of Acts. Everything in yellow is about Paul. So you can see, even in the book of Acts, Paul is just prominent throughout. I mean, you take the book of Acts and then you take the letters attributed to Paul. It just goes on and on and on. So, I want somebody, does someone have a Bible?
Yeah.
Okay, I want you to read 1 Corinthians 13, 1 through 13, but before you read it, I made the point last week, if you just consider Paul a philosopher, and you take some of the letters don't exist today, but if you take the letters that exist today, that are in the New Testament, and you put them on paper like this, you got 80 pages, right? And I made the point that if you do the same thing with the gospel, you got 40, okay? So if he is a philosopher, he didn't write a whole lot, right? But he would be the most read philosopher that we've ever had. And there's, how does that work? Because you talk about Plato and all these guys, volumes of stuff, So go ahead and, but one thing I failed to mention is that he was a poet. And a lot of times you can refer to things in the Bible as poetry, and it's not sacrilegious at all. So what she's going to read is poetry. You ready?
If I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, but do not have love, I have become a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and know all mysteries and all knowledge, if I have all faith, so as to remove mountains but do not have love, I am nothing. And if I give all my possessions to feed the poor, and if I surrender my body to be buried but do not have love, it profits me nothing. Love is patient, love is kind, and it is not jealous, love does not brag, and it is not arrogant. It does not act unbecomingly, and it does not seek its own. It is not provoked, it does not take into account of wrong suffered. It does not rejoice in unrighteousness, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. Love never fails, But if there are gifts of prophecy, they will be done away. If there are tongues, they will cease. If there is knowledge, it will be done away. For we know in part, and what we prophesy is in part. But when the perfect comes, the partial will be done away. When I was a child, I used to speak like a child, think like a child, reason like a child. When I became a man, I did away with childish things. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I will know fully, just as I also have been fully known. But now faith, hope, love, abide these three, but the greatest of these is love.
So, it's extraordinary that he was able to, just come up with these things. And what we talked about last week was we get introduced to Paul in the book of Acts. And the extraordinary thing about the book of Acts is the book of Acts is really something that occurs over 34 years. You have Christ who's crucified, the risen Christ, and then the things that take place. But if you think about, and I said this last week, if not for Paul, it wouldn't have been called Christianity. That which was there would be some kind of offshoot of, a tiny offshoot of Judaism. It wasn't there. People think that that it was a big movement and so on and so forth. It was a big movement in that when Jesus spoke, big crowds came. Big crowds came because he did miracles. That's why they came. But it wasn't like a huge movement. And it was Paul who takes it from this small little thing, and then within 34 years, it goes from Christ's resurrection to him being in Rome. By the time he gets to Rome, he'd never been to Rome, he sent a letter to Rome, but by the time he gets to Rome and he lands in the southern part of Italy and works his way up, people come to the road just to look at him because they've heard about him in 34 years. If you start with the life of Jesus, his ministry, 3 years, and then so we add that to 37 years. It goes from nothing to when he gets to Rome, there's a Christian community. It's extraordinary when you think about it. And one of the other points that I have brought out is that I gave you a description. If someone wants to read 2 Corinthians 11:23 through 25. Any good reader. Not me. Oh, go ahead. She's our reader then. Okay.
A better reader.
No, I'm just saying I'm a bad reader.
Okay, are they servants of Christ? I speak as if insane. I more so, and for more labor.
Well, no.
Okay,
Just read in the quotations.
What was it? 2 Corinthians 11?
11:23 through 25.
Oh, I see. I'm sorry. I have worked much harder, been in prison more frequently, been flogged more severely, and been exposed to death again and again. 5 times I have received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I have constantly been on the move, and I have been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my fellow Jews, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger from false believers. I have labored and toiled, and have often gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst, and have often gone without food. I have been cold and naked.
So you get the feeling that when Paul comes on the scene, that if we call it his ministry, that he's being attacked, right? Who's he being attacked by? Something that doesn't want him to be successful. And he goes on in Galatians to say, I bear on my body the marks of Jesus. So, and then when you study Paul, you hear about 3 mission trips. But I tell you that when he is, I've had this allergy thing, and it just got real bad today. I had to go to Austin. But anyway, the good news is I think this is my last trip to Austin for 2018. But anyway, the point I was trying to make is people say Paul had 3 mission trips. Yeah, well, he does a lot on the journey from the Middle East to Rome. And just think what happens to it. I mean, okay, his ship's wrecked. That's kind of a big, we don't want you to make it. He lands on an island, a snake bites him. I mean, it's just all these things. And so some people consider that journey as a mission too. And then when he gets to Rome, he's kept under house arrest, and he lives with a Roman soldier. And he preaches the gospel. And then there's speculation that he's released from house arrest, and then he goes to Spain, and then he comes back to Rome. So, I mean, and the point I was trying to make last week, he was truly, I mean, when he was growing up, he wasn't homeless. And when he went to Jerusalem, he was. But when he got converted, he pretty much becomes a homeless person. So, and I also tell you that he'll get in your face. And we'll read some verses where he gets in people's faces. He's not a bashful guy. He's not a great speaker, because there's others who are a lot better. But he knows what he's talking about. And he's very direct.
He doesn't sugarcoat it.
He doesn't sugarcoat it. And then on page 4, that's just a fresco that was done in the 4th century. And I just talked about people think he was bald and just what he looked like. On page 5, this just shows you where the various letters were written, where he was when he wrote them. And then on page 6, I just give you a rundown of when, for example, when was Jesus born, and all the events that take place. And then the point I was trying to make through all that is it would be possible that Paul was in Jerusalem when Jesus was crucified. But I also made the point that Jerusalem, if it's a city of 50,000 and it swells to a city of 300,000 during that particular festival, you could also say he missed it, because he doesn't talk about it. He never mentions that. And so we talked a little bit about his childhood. He's raised in Tarsus, which is a major city. I told you that there was a time 100 years before his birth that the philosophers from Athens went to Tarsus because they took the wrong side of a war, so they hung out there. And so he's totally exposed to Greek philosophy, and it's also a Roman city, so he's exposed to the Romans and the Greeks and the Jewish faith. He's immersed in all of that. I also brought out that he was probably an apprentice to his father, and that's where he became a tent maker, and that his father was a Pharisee. I explained to you what Pharisees meant, and I'm gonna leave it there. But the reason you're getting this, one of those handouts, is gonna come back to this Pharisee thing. So he was a student. I said up to the age of 5, he was probably trained by his mother. From the age of, say, 10 to 12 or something like that, his father, who was a Pharisee, would have trained him. And then after 13, if you're going to really immerse yourself in it and follow a rabbi or a teacher, that's when you would do it, after you've perfected the apprenticeship. And so that's when he goes to Jerusalem, and we give you the name of the Pharisee that he studied under, who's well known, today is well known. and that this Pharisee taught from, say, 22 AD to maybe 55 AD. So in the book of Acts, it talks about this particular Pharisee and his take on the whole Christian thing. He's more, if we were to say liberal and conservative, he would be liberal. He would go like, yeah, I get it, and they're saying all this stuff, but he says, if they are not from God, we've had these people before, they're going to come and they're going to go away, and that's it. If they are from God, there's nothing we can do about it. So he was taking that track, but Paul was on the other track, was this radical conservative track, which was we have to be extremely strict because if we're extremely strict, that will bring God back to us. Okay, and I'm going to get into that in a minute. Even to the point that we would kill someone. Okay, and then I told you in Acts where it says Stephen was stoned and they lay the coats at the feet of a young man. That young man is Paul, and Paul's probably in his late teens when this happens. So that's kind of a roundup of what we talked about last week, and then we got to on page 12. I don't know if he's on page 12, but on page 12, that shows you this is going to be the route between Jerusalem and Damascus. Then we get into he refers to himself as a persecutor of believers in Galatians. And then we get, he was the Pharisee of the Pharisee. He, for his age, he was extremely intelligent, but he was extremely rigid in his beliefs. And then, so we get into Acts 9, and we were talking about this last week. There's a conversion and the road to Damascus, and he has a close encounter. He goes on to say in Galatians, he was taken to the third heaven. And third heaven, I explained last week that, everybody's, the term seventh heaven, so that's like as good as it gets. And there's some talk that the Jews at that time might have had some kind of belief in different levels of heaven. Not a lot of talk about it, though. But what most people think third heaven meant was third heaven could be God created the earth, and so that would be part of it. The second part would be the sky, and the third part would be the cosmos. It doesn't matter, except that what he sees, he and Jesus talk. And think about in the Old Testament, I mentioned this to Steve, Moses comes into the presence of God, right? On the mountain. And you look it up, his face is not the same after. He wears something over his face from the encounter. So if we say Paul had an encounter, he goes blind, right? So he has this encounter, where Jesus is telling him, why are you persecuting me? And then, and he answers Jesus by referring to Jesus as Lord. So immediately he knows he's talking to God, right? So he goes into Damascus, and he's staying with I think his name, a Jewish person there. I think his name was Judas, and not Judas. But anyway, he's staying there, and it's on a street called Straight Street. And I told you, if you Google that, you can Straight Street is still there in Damascus. And he doesn't eat, he doesn't drink, and he's just praying. And then he's not sure what happened to him. And then he's told, a believer who lives in Damascus, Ananias, is told, you need to go talk to Paul. He goes, well, I don't think any, he's talking, and he goes, that might not be a good idea. And he goes, no, you need to go talk to Paul, because this is the man who's going to preach to the Gentiles and to the kings of the earth. And so reluctantly, he goes and says he was sent by God, and at the end of that, he baptizes Paul, and he refers to Paul in a Christian way like brother. Okay, so he's part of the believing of the Christian group there in Damascus. So then, I told you, if you read the book of Acts, think about what he's trying to do. I'm trying to write, he would say to you, I'm trying to write 34 years of history in, a few pages. So his timeline doesn't always link up, okay? Because if you read Acts, it tells you that Paul's in Damascus and he's going around and proclaiming Jesus in synagogues and causing a fuss. And then he goes to Jerusalem. But when Paul talks about it, that's not what happened. He said, I was in Damascus and then I went into Arabia for 3 years. The big question with the Arabian thing is, you have the page 16. So a lot of people go, well, Arabia, well, you see this is the outline of a nation, an ancient nation. And that kingdom went all the way down and included the Sinai, which is here at the bottom. In the Sinai let me change it. Some people think for 3 years after his conversion, he goes into this kingdom and he preaches the gospel. Some people think that, okay? Other people think that he goes to Mount Sinai, okay? In one of his letters, he makes a reference to Mount Sinai. He's a Pharisee. He knows the scriptures back and forth. He knows the importance of Mount Sinai. Some people say he goes to Mount Sinai. The precedent for him going to Mount Sinai would be, last week I asked you, what happened at Mount Sinai? Moses and the 10 Commandments. And then I said, what else happened there? And then we discussed Elijah. Okay, he took on the priest of Baal. Or am I saying it right? Baal. I always get that wrong. He took on those priests. He won. They were massacred. And then he goes to Mount Sinai and talks to God for 40 days. So some people think in that 3 years, he's sitting there and God, Jesus, is explaining things to him. Because when he comes out of the desert, you can't keep this guy's mouth shut. He just, And so anyway, let me just leave it like this. There's two theories. One theory is he goes and he preaches the gospel all over this kingdom. And because he did it, the king of this kingdom, which you'll hear about in the book of Acts, had it out for him and wanted to kill him. That's one theory. The other theory is he goes to Mount Sinai and he communes with God and Jesus for 3 years. Okay? So, I think we're pretty caught up. Now, I have to get a point across. I told you last week that, what book was it in? Ezekiel, I think. I told you that in the Jewish faith, you used to have the Ark of the Covenant, right? Everybody knows what that is. What was in the Ark of the Covenant?
The 10 Commandments.
And there's other stuff too. Right, you got it. I'm impressed. Last week, nobody didn't answer anything. This week, you guys are hitting 1,000. Absolutely right. What's the tabernacle?
That was was sent when the Ark of the Covenant was held until the actual temple was born.
So that would be this drawing here, right? Now, when they would take the ark and set up the tabernacle, wherever they were in the 40 years, right? Who's in here? Who communes with them?
Priest, the high priest.
Holy of holies.
God. Heaven and earth are connected. That's what the Jews believe. Heaven and earth aren't, heaven's not way up there. When they had this ark in the tabernacle, heaven and earth were connected because God was there. Okay, tell me what happens with the tabernacle and all that. So here's how they did it when they're in the wilderness. And what's the next thing that happens?
In Ezekiel 10, you said God leaves.
No, you're jumping ahead.
Oh, okay.
So David says to God, I want to build you a house. What did God say to David?
Okay.
No, he didn't say, he didn't say that. No. True, but listen. He says, I'm going to build you a house. And from that house and your offspring will come this great leader. That's the house. David says, let me build you a house. He goes, no, I'm going to build you a house. And the end result is there's going to be a great, from your line is going to be this person who will save Israel and protect Israel and so on and so forth. He doesn't build it. Then you go to the next page and you see a picture like this, and this is the first temple. Now, it was believed that God could come to this place and commune with people. They had a section in there, the Holy of the Holies, and he would be there. So you were in contact. Heaven and earth come together again, okay? When he's there, he's there. So God's with his people. Then I said, in Ezekiel, it describes God leaves the temple, okay? I'm done. I'm gone. And God does not return. He doesn't return. When Herod builds this thing, this temple, God never went back there. They had a Holy of Holies. God wasn't there. And I tell you, if you were a Pharisee or someone who studied the scriptures in those days, that was big story. That's what they knew. God was with us. He traveled around 40 years with us, communing with us. Then we built the temple and he was there. Then things went bad and, the people were sinful and so on and so forth. And God leaves the temple. So God is gone. So this brings me back to the Pharisee thing. The Pharisees think, why did God leave? Why did he leave? Where's God? Why are we ruled by pagans? What's up? The answer is the Pharisees would believe if we just make everybody do everything exactly right, God is going to come back. That's what they believe, okay? All right. So we're back with Paul at Mount Sinai. And he's had this close encounter with Jesus. And he's probably communing with God, Jesus, at Mount Sinai. And he suddenly understands we've been doing it a certain way, expecting if we all do it right, and the guys aren't doing it right, we mess with them or we kill them or whatever, and if we get it right, God's going to come back and he's going to make all the pagans go away, and this Messiah is going to come and he's going to be a king. In the Old Testament, the Messiah is going to be a king, right? And he goes, it makes sense. God did come back. The whole thing we've been waiting for actually occurred, and we didn't see it. And you go, well, now you're losing me. Okay. Google how many times does Jesus say, behold, the kingdom of God. Behold, the kingdom of heaven in the New Testament. If you knew your scriptures in first century Israel, right? You totally got what he was saying. I am back. The kingdom of heaven has returned. That's what he was saying. And so, is that the thing that makes Paul, in 3 years of, is that the thing that makes him on fire? That everything that his father taught him and his father taught him, and we've been waiting for, well, I'll put it to you this way. The first temple is probably done away with hundreds of years BC. The new temple is started when Herod is the king, so that's going to be, whatever, decades BC. And by the time Jesus is crucified, that thing isn't done. They're still working on it. And it'll be destroyed in about 70 AD. The temple is destroyed. So did it dawn on Paul that that's the person, that's God? He came back, and we just didn't recognize that he came back. That's what a first century Jewish person would be thinking about. They didn't think in terms of, there's Jesus, if I do what Jesus says, I'm going to heaven. They thought about, this person is going to come back, and when he comes back, there's going to be a resurrection of the dead. And the resurrection of the dead, there's going to be a new heaven and a new earth. They're going to be one place, and God's going to reign, and the world's going to be great. That's what they believe. Okay? So, but there's I have to offer this, that when you hear statements like that, you go, yeah, but when Jesus was on the cross, he said to that guy, this day you will be with me in paradise. And then he talks and he says, in my Father's house there are many mansions. So but I'm saying, if you were in the first century, that's what you would have been looking for. Okay? God to come back. Paul understands God came back. Okay? So then he leaves Arabia after 3 years, goes back. By the way, if you Google how many times does Jesus talk about the kingdom of God, I think it's 10 times he'll make that reference. And a Jewish person would know what that meant. Then on page 15, I just give you some prophecies from the Old Testament that would have reinforced what that Paul realized, that this was God coming back. Now, go to the very back. And I gave you something last week, and I said that we have an appendix in the back. And I said that on page 64, that the oldest scroll that was known was 1,000 years old. And then they found the scrolls at Qumran, and those are 2,000 years old. And the book of all the books of the Old Testament were there, except one or two. And I gave you a translation of that scroll from Qumran of Isaiah 53. Now, if you read Isaiah 53, you're going to go, well, we could have somebody read it, but it'd take a long time. But basically, it's God. It's the prophecy of a Messiah coming back. There's real poignant things saying that he was innocent and he was put to death, and he was put with the wicked ones. But then someone came and put him in a tomb. That would be Joseph of Arimathea, and if you read this, it's like you're reading about a person, okay? Which I think everybody would recognize. But in the Jewish faith, Isaiah 53 is about Israel. They don't believe it's about a person. So, and I'm telling you that Paul would have recognized Isaiah 53, and he goes, that's just another thing that it was Jesus. Everything they predicted, even about his death, even that he did no wrong, he was an innocent man, he was crucified. All those things are said in Isaiah 53. And Paul's there at Mount Sinai, and all these Old Testament prophecies are coming back, and he's communing with God, and he's just getting to be this man on fire, okay? So, he's a man on fire, and now he decides he's going to go back to Damascus. And just guess how that goes. He's in the synagogues. I got to tell you guys stuff. You're not going to believe this. And, you go talk and say, all those prophecies, and they are all pointing towards Jesus. And Jesus is God. God has come back. Heaven and earth. And all these things, he would be preaching that. What do you think the reaction would be? Is it a good reaction or is it a bad reaction? So what happens is you're going to find out that some Jews in that community will, when he comes back to Damascus, want to kill him. Right? They're waiting for him, right? You're also going to find out that king of that kingdom we talked about, he's got it out for Paul too. He wants to kill him too. Were they working together? Don't know. But his life was not long if he stayed in Damascus, is the bottom line, right? But then the interesting thing comes. If you read the book of Acts, he goes to Jerusalem and he meets all the disciples and apostles and all that, right? But again, Luke is trying to condense a bunch of stuff into a few pages, okay? If you read Paul's letters, he says, I went to Jerusalem and I was with Cephas, which is Peter, and I was with James. That's it. And he's very specific. I saw no one else. But if you read the book of Acts, Barnabas, all the apostles, they're all afraid of Paul, right? And Barnabas acts as a go-between. He's all right. He's cool. Just talk to him. And they get together, right? Well, Paul said it didn't happen that way. So you have to make up your mind. Paul says that if you go by Paul's recollection, the meeting with the apostles and the disciples, except for the two I mentioned, James is not a disciple. He's the brother of Jesus. And I pointed out last week, he becomes a believer after the fact. Okay? Peter is Peter, right? So you can make what you want of it. But I think to suffice it to say, now he's in Jerusalem. Now, what is he doing there? Do you think he's going to all the people he studied with and say, we had it all wrong, and we were wrong, and maybe he did. And it becomes very, very dangerous. And the believers in Jerusalem are going like, the guy's a little bit too much on fire. And they say, well, what do we do? And then one of these guys says, send him home. And they sent him home for 10 years. Bye. So here's where we are in the story. You know about his, where he's born, his family, his training, him being a zealot persecutor, road to Damascus, encounter with Jesus, Ananias, baptized, goes to Arabia, comes back, he's a man on fire, he goes to Damascus and causes a ruckus, so two groups actually want to kill him, and then he goes to Jerusalem and they get a load of him and they go, we need to send him home, okay? Now think about that. You have Jesus tell you what's what, right? And you believe, and that's it, right? And you go and tell people, and they tell you to go home. How would you feel? Now, some people will speculate that Paul goes home and to his family, and people speculate that by the time Paul goes to Jerusalem, as 13, 14, whatever, he's already betrothed to a girl. That would be normal. That would be absolutely normal. Then some people then say, well, if he was engaged and he comes back and he's gone a little wacko in the head, was it the family of her that he was engaged to? Did they say, well, not so much? Or did she say, you know, you're kind of different, not now? Or did she get married to somebody else because he'd been gone so long? Or did he get married and she died? You could ask these questions and drive yourself insane.
Have you studied, do you think he was a Sanhedrin? Was he already, I mean, you have to go through certain regiments to become, and
No.
one of them is you have to be married.
Right.
Oh.
Some
All
theologians,
I'm telling you is, what I just told you is the
he
speculation.
may not have gone through this whole.
Well, I'm saying when he left Tarsus to go to Jerusalem, if he was a typical Jewish 13, 14, he was betrothed. And after that, we don't know. They broke it off, he broke it off, he got married, she died. We don't know. So, and then some people say, well, he was preaching the gospel when he was in Tarsus. All we know for sure is he made an impression on somebody, because Barnabas goes to Tarsus and he says, I want you, after 10 years, I want you to come to me, or come with me to Antioch, and we're starting a church to the Gentiles. And he goes. That we know, okay? So I just ask that you just think about having all this stuff revealed to you, and then telling people, they send you home, and then 10 years, okay? From this point forward, this is where the homelessness will begin. I'm going to read this for you. This is on page 20. This is him talking. This is in Galatians 1:18 through 19. Then after 3 years, being in Arabia, I went up to Jerusalem to get acquainted with Cephas, and I stayed with him 15 days. I saw no other apostles, only James, the Lord's brother. And he says that. He goes on to say, then after 14 years, I went up to Jerusalem, this time with Barnabas, and we took along Titus. That's going to get into another thing. So all we know is at some point in time that they used to, like the disciples and the apostles would be called the pillars of the church. And he will refer to them as the pillars. At some point in time, they all feel comfortable enough to start dealing with it. So he...
Paul, do you think there's a great amount of distrust there to start with?
I'm sorry?
You think there's a great amount of distrust there to start with?
I'll tell you, the reason I think when he came back and he's all on fire and they said, you know, you need to go home, is I think the stoning, the murder or martyrdom of Stephen had taken place 3 years before. And they were thinking, like, if this guy goes around and he goes talks to all the people he used to study with, and he's going into synagogues and just stirring things up, then the persecution's going to come back, and it's come back worse. So that's what I think they thought. And they just thought he just needs to go home, you know, and maybe over time he'll mellow, but he doesn't mellow. So in Galatians it talks about he's sent back, and then there's no writings about what happens in Tarsus. I mean, people speculate, but there's no writings. The only thing that's mentioned about when he's sent back to Tarsus is in Acts. It mentions Barnabas going looking for Paul, and then he takes Paul to Antioch, and then he and Barnabas start preaching the gospel to the Gentiles in Antioch. In Acts 9, 15, and 16, it says, "This man is chosen," and this is Jesus speaking to Ananias, "This man is my chosen instrument to proclaim the name to the Gentiles and their kings and to the people of Israel. I will show him how much he must suffer for my name." So I think early on, Paul realizes that he's going to spread the word, and he's going to primarily spread the word to the Gentiles, and it's not going to be an easy road. And it's not, because the verse we read where he said he'd been beaten so many times, he'd been given 40 lashes minus one. By those things happened when he got the Jews riled up in the synagogue. It talks about, I think, 3 times he was beaten with rods. That's probably by Romans. The stoning, I mean, they thought he was dead. They thought they killed him. And the life after accepting Jesus, the life that he took on was a pretty rough life. Now, what we know about Barnabas comes from Cyprus, and his real name is Joseph, but we all call him Barnabas. Okay, that's true. My name's Joseph, but my friends call me Barnabas. The word Barnabas means son of encouragement. And Barnabas becomes known by the apostles and the disciples because he was a guy who owned land and sold it, and that money was given to the ministry, so the ministry could go. So he was acknowledged as a good man amongst the apostles. So Barnabas and Paul are in Antioch, and they're teaching to the Gentiles in Antioch, which are Greeks. And this is where some division starts, because while they worked in Antioch, they were very, very successful with their mission in Antioch, and many, many people were converted. Then a prophet comes and tells the church at Antioch that there's going to be a great famine, and that the people in Judea, the church in Jerusalem, are going to need help. And so they send Paul and Barnabas and Titus. They raise money in Antioch and food and deliver it to what would be the Christian church in Jerusalem, and they give things to people living in Judea. Now, what occurs is they are bringing gifts and helping the church, which is a great thing for them to do, especially when you think it's Gentiles that are helping those that believe in Jesus who are Jewish. Those that believed in Jesus who were Jewish believe this, that we believe Jesus was the one who was to come. We believe that. And he had been prophesied. We believe that. But we also believe you have to be Jewish. You have to adhere to the traditions of our faith. And so when they see Titus, well, he's a Gentile. And so they're going, for really, shouldn't you make him a complete person? And you know what that means. And Titus is going, why did I come? I didn't want to come. So they have a big disagreement over that. And basically what it comes down to is that James, the brother of Jesus, becomes the leader of the Jerusalem church. And that would be a whole study in itself. I mean, why did he become the head of the church? Why wasn't it Peter? Why wasn't it whoever? And they want to circumcise Titus. And then Paul and Barnabas make this impassioned plea and convince James and Peter that we don't need to do that. And so Titus is saved for another day.
And I like it that you call him I guess they did in those days, call him a proselyte. Today, we proselyte when we try to get somebody to come from another denomination or church, to ours, when they were just fine there. But here it's the non-Jewish conversion, so that's where we got that word, but we change it today a little bit.
Yep. Now, where we are I got 4 minutes because I'm looking at Monette, and we worked it out before. She said, Paul, when you run out of time, you can see this. You can see this. So I'm looking at you, Monette. I'm waiting for this. But we're on page 24. But what I want you to, I'm going to sum it up. What I want you to go away with tonight is this. First century Jew. You know God left his people because his people did wicked things. And so he's gone. The same, if you want the history of the Jewish people, start with the Garden of Eden. I am with you, I commune with you, just obey my law, and everything's great. And what do? They hit that apple tree. And this thing is a reoccurring thing, and they find themselves sent into exile, ruled by pagans, and so on and so forth. And so at this point in time, if you could just keep the thought that the believers in Jerusalem did believe that Jesus was the returning of God to his people, okay? But he didn't return to the temple. He returned to this group of people. The other thing to remember is that what we're going to get into next time is you have Jewish believers and you have Gentile believers. And the big fight becomes Jewish believers say, we think what you're doing in Antioch is just unbelievable. And there was a famine and you came and helped us. That's all good stuff. But those guys aren't following the law. And what's the law? About 640 things that they derived after the Ten Commandments, seriously. So you're going to have people like Peter, who's going to vacillate on that issue. And he'll have a vision, and God will just explain to him as black and white. You see these animals? He has a vision. God created them. It's okay. That's also to say, a Gentile can be a believer. It's just not confined. Matter of fact, when you go into the Old Testament, it talks about this. It says, God chose you, this people. I chose you, and I tried to make you, to follow laws and not be wicked. And I want you to be a light to the world. It was never meant just to stay there. It was supposed to be a light to the world. Jesus comes, and all of a sudden, you see this light of the world starting up. So the thing to keep in mind for next week is Jewish believers. I believe in Jesus, but I also believe in law, and we're going to do the law thing like we've always done, and we're just going to believe Jesus was the Messiah that we're waiting for. And then you have the Greeks over here saying, well, we like to eat pork, for example. Or we like to We see nothing wrong with sitting down with a Jewish person and breaking bread. Well, if you're in this group, you ain't gonna do that, because these people are not Jewish. You wouldn't eat with them, okay? And it really gets that serious, you know? So you have the beginning of the Christian faith, and they're arguing about this stuff, okay? And the guy who will come up in the end and just say, again, you know, you're missing the point, it's gonna be Paul. And finally, the thing you have to remember is that people came up and said to Paul, they'd hear the story of the conversion, he got that from the guys in Jerusalem. And then Paul, writing his letters, I didn't get it from a human being. It was given to me by God. And I didn't even go see those guys for 3 years after it was given to me. They're insinuating he stole the idea. And he will say in his letters, I didn't steal anything. He'll go back and say, from the time I was in my mother's womb, this was decided. Had nothing to do with them. And like the first week, there's jealousies and stuff. He will be attacked from his own group for his beliefs. The bottom line, what you got to get out of this Paul story is he had a rough life. And sometimes in his letters, he'll talk about, you know, I'm going to die soon, and might not be that bad. Seriously, might not be that bad. You know. So anyway, next week we're gonna leave Antioch, and we're gonna talk about his first mission. So there we are. Did I end on time? I'm good. Thank you.